I've really enjoyed this interview. Actually, it's been amazing. Actually, I've really enjoyed myself, and you actually genuinely listen, which is a rare thing, I think.
Welcome to Morning Talk Show. Today, my conversation with Tahir Nasser. Tahir is from the publishing platform, YouTube channel known as Rational Religion. I enjoy their channel. It's basically an intellectual, philosophical, and spiritual discussion of religion from the perspective of their particular sect of Islam. So we get into that. I won't describe it too much, but I really enjoyed this. I found Tahir to be open, honest, and very intelligent, and also just like a person whose faith is very genuine. And so that's always interesting, to talk to someone like that. So please like and subscribe if you like this conversation or want to hear more. Definitely go over to Rational Religion, subscribe to their channel. They've got a lot of good content. They talk to people all over the place. Anyone with an interesting perspective on religion and spirituality, they might talk to. They've talked to some people that I really enjoy. So here's my conversation with Tahir Nasser from Rational Religion.
It's okay. Oh, no, I'm just rambling. You'd think these things in 2020 would be ironed out. You would just tell your computer, I want to talk to Tahir, and it would just say, would you like to record the audio? Yes. And, you'd think we'd be doing that by now, but I guess not.
You should create that software. That would be a very popular software.
Oh, man. Yeah, people would go nuts for it.
Yeah, they would.
So, yeah, I was hoping you would welcome Tahir Nasser. And I was wondering if you could briefly describe what Rational Religion is. I think of it as a YouTube channel, but there's a website and more. So could you describe it?
Yeah, so it's basically an online platform. Our tagline is making sense of spirituality. So we feel that there was a big gaping need for a form of spirituality which which reconciles the mind and the heart together. So in other words, everybody has a spiritual yearning, but in recent years, there's been such a kind of drive to label and depict religious belief and religious thought and spiritual thought as irrational inherently, and atheism and agnosticism, or even deism, as the more rational perspective. And we feel that this is most certainly not the case, that actually religious belief in and of itself, without going into different religions, religious belief as a starting point and belief in God is actually the most rational position you can hold and is the most evidence-based position you can hold.
Right.
And so that was really what we wanted to present to people. And we do that from our perspective as Ahmadi Muslims. So we are part of the members of the Ahmadi Muslim community, and our channel is supported by the Ahmadi Muslim community as well. And we present what we think is the true spirituality which leads to God. And so the founder of the Ahmadiyya, I'll give you a very brief summary so then it'll make more sense. The founder of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, his name was Mirza Ghulam Ahmad. And he was born in 1835, died in 1908. And he claimed to fulfill the Islamic prophecy of the Prophet Muhammad, which, peace be upon him, which is that when Muslims would degenerate in their spiritual practices and in their understanding of religious belief, then a Messiah would be sent to them like Jesus was sent to the Jews. Right? And so this is basically, and he basically said that I am that messianic figure within Islam to bring Muslims and the whole world to the true face of religious belief. So we're presenting what we believe is the religion which brings together the heart and mind and the soul.
Wow. That's great. And it's really refreshing to hear religion spoken about. Like I've just heard it so much spoken about from a Christian perspective that, I mean, and I'm not even antagonistic towards it so much as just completely numb to it.
Okay.
So it's very interesting to hear faithful people of the Muslim faith. And I don't think I can quite pronounce the name of the group yet.
It's all right. Give it a go.
You know,
Ahmadiyya.
Ahmadiyya.
That's fine. That's absolutely
Okay.
fine. Yeah,
Okay.
That's it.
Yeah, no, really interesting and really cool. It sounds like your founder made some pretty bold and impressive claims, and that you guys are trying to help affirm those claims, and that's cool. I had actually one of the quotes from one of the videos you guys had about him was that experience trumps philosophizing. That was in the interview that you did with I think that was when you were talking to Rupert Sheldrake. And then also the idea of proving God through revelation and experience, that was one of his I mean,
basically he basically said that, look, you can, and he, you know, his majority of his claims fell within the late 19th century, early 20th century, which is probably, I would say, an even more atheistic time than now when it comes to philosophical thought. Right? I'm not talking about how many people are believers. I'm talking about actually philosophical thought.
Right.
So at that point in time, the top scientists believed the universe was eternal. The top scientists believed that there was random processes which led to, you know, or evolution of all biological forms that we have today, which is still partly the case. And there was the belief that human beings were nothing more than machines. And kind of the discoveries of the Big Bang, molecular biology, and how evolution can or cannot happen. It certainly does happen in our perspective, but not through Darwinian processes. That kind of has undermined it throughout the 20th century. So he came at a time which was most atheistic in its thought. And he basically argued that, look, you've got all of these religions that claim that God spoke to Abraham and Moses and Jesus and Muhammad, peace be upon him, and Buddha and Zoroaster and Socrates and Lao Tzu and, you know, etc. And he basically said that, why is it that there is no religion today that can bring you back into and give you those experiences today? And he said that a religion that teaches you, this is his main philosophy, which is that a religion that teaches you that God has spoken in the past but no longer speaks, is a religion that ultimately can't lead you to that God. Right. And that a religion that is based on only fables and stories about what he did in the past is actually a form of idolatry.
Yeah. Oh, man. This is one of the things I love about your channel and you guys, is that you say these things that are kind of on my mind and that I've been tunneling away towards. And, you know, culturally, we're tunneling away from maybe slightly different perspectives, but there's such a consonance. Yeah, there's such a consonance there. That idea of revelation is on my mind constantly. You know, if God doesn't say anything new now, and it's said, that's spoken wordlessly, I guess, by much, even religion now. That's
by mainstream religious belief, which is have faith and accept it, and, you know, you'll find out after death. Whereas in the Ahmadiyya Islamic perspective, if you don't find out in this life, you're not going to find out in the afterlife, because the afterlife is a reflection of your life now.
Right. Yeah. You'll at least get glimpses of these things. And I'm very much pleased to hear these things, and nice to hear them kind of confirmed through your channel. So thank you for that.
So he wrote this book called Philosophy of the Teachings of Islam. It's a very short book. It'll only take you 4 hours to read, I know, because I read it for an audiobook. And, you know, it's a groundbreaking book because it lays out the entire philosophy of Islam. And that is really, I think, the best book for kind of introducing people to this particular strain of idea.
Okay. Very interesting. Yeah, I'm excited to read it. So I guess I'll move on to my next question here. As I said to you in the emails, I'm not used to working from questions, so this is a fun experiment for me.
Sorry.
Oh, no, that's fine. You can probably tell that the way my brain works is when people talk, ideas are kind of forming, and I just and typically fill an hour that way.
Well, no, if you want to, that's, I don't mind that, as long as
Well, no,
if you want to do it like that, that's absolutely fine.
Well,
but
no, I'm interested to try the question thing. Maybe it'll turn out to be something I enjoy. So I'll experiment.
Okay, cool.
So I appreciate that.
Cool.
So one of them was what your earliest memory of religion would be, or kind of your early memories of religious experience. Like, I guess to add to that, were you a part of this strain of Islam from the beginning, or did your family convert that way, or did you personally?
So my grandfather accepted this form of Islam, and we're very much persecuted by the Sunni Muslim community in certain countries. I wouldn't say widespread. I have Sunni Muslim friends here in the UK, but governments and institutions, for example, in Pakistan, it's illegal to call yourself a Muslim if you're an Ahmadi Muslim. So you have to put on your passport. Every person who applies for a passport has to sign a declaration saying that they believe that the founder of our community is a liar. And if you don't sign that, you will be designated as an Ahmadi, in which case, for example, you can't go to the Hajj with that passport, because in Saudi Arabia, you're banned. We're not regarded as Muslims.
Huh.
And the reason for that is because, they have this belief that revelation has ceased and that God has stopped speaking, and there's no such thing as prophet anymore.
Right.
Whereas we believe that God can never stop speaking, because this is his means of communicating with us.
Yeah.
We only believe that though the final law and the final teaching of Islam has been perfected, God will continue reminding humanity to come back to that. In terms of my earliest experience or my earliest memory of Islam Ahmadiyya, it would probably be trying to avoid doing my prayers. In all honesty,
can relate to that.
That's probably my earliest memory. And then I did something rather naughty at about age 11. And my parents basically grounded me for a week. And I had no reason now to effectively pretend like I was praying, because I was going to be in my room anyway.
Right.
It didn't make a difference. I was going to be in my room for the next 7 days. And so I decided to pray, and I read the philosophy of the teachings of Islam when I was 11. Since then, I've read it probably about 15 times.
Wow.
And that book changed my life, actually.
Wow.
And that's when I properly started praying, about that age then. And that's my earliest real memory in terms of actual experience. And
it was an effective punishment then, I guess. Wow. That's great. I've definitely had a lot of that kind of thing in my life.
It wasn't actually something naughty that I per se done. I mean, one of the things we believe in is that one of the main means by which God communicates with people is through true dreams, and this is found throughout the Old Testament, New Testament, the Quran, and other religions as well. And we experience it, that God will often communicate something to us. Sometimes it's with respect to a future matter, a future event, and it will be fulfilled. And other times it's just about information. And my mother actually had a dream about me when I was 11 that I wasn't going down the right path in life. And so the next time I did something even slightly naughty, that's when she grounded me. So if I just done that thing and she hadn't had that dream, she wouldn't have ever grounded me, she says.
Oh, okay.
So it's actually because she was worried because of that dream that she'd had, saying I wasn't going down the right path, that she grounded me. And that's what actually changed my life around. And really what I think changed my life around was her prayers.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Prayer, I mean, to just talk a little bit about myself.
Yes, please.
I'm from, as I said, I'm from the Christian tradition. I still identify as a Christian, but around the time my children were born, not shockingly, I had this, I kind of had a spiritual experience that was accompanied. It wasn't a dream. It was one of the only times in my life that something profound has happened suddenly in waking life that led to what appears to be kind of a permanent change in me, and the whole message I felt that God was giving me. And I don't I haven't talked about this yet actually on the podcast, so I don't want to imply that I know that I understand this experience fully, or that I know it was God or anything like that. But what it seemed like was God was telling me to go away from my religion in kind of in a protected way, where I immediately had this accompanying ability to kind of follow some of my thoughts in a new way, to follow them down much further than I was able to before, in my sort of ability to philosophize, but in a way that was life-giving, that was impactful, and changed my behavior, and made me begin to love my family more, and to care for humans more, and all of that. All of that capacity seemed kind of unleashed when I had this freedom to question and to go and change, which is something that I feel your channel does a good job of, is questioning and thinking and really interrogating these ideas. And so you can tell me your perspective on this, but after a year or two of these intense, anytime I was alone, basically, like anytime I was alone, walking somewhere, on the train, in the car, I was having these what felt like dialogues in a way, but they were really philosophical. And I didn't begin with any of the, dear Jesus or Heavenly Father, or the things I was supposed to say. But like, I'm surprised it took me this long to figure this out, but it began to feel that was my prayer life. Because there was and you can weigh in on this, but there was an honesty to it. There was a real honesty and a desire to love more and to understand human beings. And it wasn't always using the name of God in what I was doing, but yeah, I mean, it felt like that was my prayer life. And then as I engaged in it more, I started to actually intentionally think of it as prayer, which I think only deepened it. And so I guess I'm wondering what your thoughts are on prayer that isn't prayer. Do you know what I mean? That prayer that doesn't have all the trappings that maybe we're taught about prayer.
So in the Islamic tradition, we're taught a kind of a ritual prayer, which you'll have seen, like standing, bowing, prostrating. When you learn it and you start doing it, it becomes second nature. So it's no longer a ritual. It's kind of like an ingrained movement. And so people often, I'm beginning with my answer to you with that, because people see that ritual prayer and they think to themselves very formulaic. But actually it's not. It's actually, because it becomes so ingrained, it becomes natural. And the movements themselves put your mind into different states. So for example, and this is one of the things he talks about, philosophy of the teachings of Islam, which is that the physical postures of your body affect the state of your soul, which is why in Islam there's the prostration. That prostration, the bowing, the standing humbly, etc., the kneeling. These are all universal movements in prayer. And I would say that, in answer to your question as to what do you think about prayer that isn't formulaically prayer, even in a way, even just a single word or a syllable can be a prayer. Because God actually is not looking at the outward form continuously. He's actually looking at what those represent to you. And in prayer, I found, and this is again one of the things that is taught now in my faith belief, which is that prayer which affects the human soul the most is actually the prayer that's going to affect God the most. And even if that be something which is completely almost addressing God, almost like what other people would consider irreverent. So a great example is the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He narrated a story. It's a very famous hadith. It means a narration of the Prophet of Islam, in which he said that Moses was once passing by a shepherd who was tending to his flock, and the shepherd was kneeling in prayer. And he was out loud praying. He was saying, "Oh God, if I meet you, I will wash your feet. And if I meet you, I'll pick the lice out of your hair, and I'll clean the dirt from under your nails, and I'll wash your face," and things like that. And Moses said to him, "What's wrong with you? God isn't a man like you that you should wash his feet and his nose and his hair." And he said, and the Prophet Muhammad said, at that very moment, God intervened and spoke to Moses and says, "What are you doing getting between me and my servant?" I was enjoying that kind of his prayer so much, and you've now put him off, right?
Interesting. Yeah.
So yeah, that's
rejecting a formulaic or prescribed idea.
Yes.
So if I hear you correctly, then you're kind of saying that the physical manifestations of prayer that we have seen in the Islamic faith, and even somewhat in other faiths, or many other faiths actually, is more for the sake of the prayer, rather than like more to get you to a state of honesty with God, rather than it's not a superstitious thing, is the point.
No.
If you don't do
There's
it
a wisdom.
properly,
there's a wisdom to it. I mean, and if you're not praying in that formulaic ritualistic way in the formal prayer, in Islam you're meant to be talking to God all day long. So before you do any action, you're meant to say Bismillah, which means in the name of Allah. When you begin eating, you say you thank God for giving you that food. When you finish, you say thank you God for giving that food. When you step into a car on a journey, you pray to God. There's a prayer for that. When you get off the journey, there's a prayer for going up a hill, walking down a hill. There's literally every state of your moment should actually be a conversation with God.
Okay. Yeah. And it's interesting. In terms of turning God into a human, or thinking of the washing your fingernails and all of that, or that's something that's also been on my mind, which is this idea that that God, I mean, and my notions of God, I guess I've reduced the number of things at this point in my life. I've reduced the number of things that I believe by a huge amount, not because hopefully not in a self-righteous way, not with the intention of never believing them again, just with the intention of at this point I was being false in saying I believed this or that, and trying to be as few things as possible. But it's difficult not to anthropomorphize God. And I like the idea in the story of saying that it wasn't wrong for this man to be thinking of God as the type of being that he was most familiar with, and trying to have reverence.
Exactly.
In the place that he was at. And maybe there is a state of transcendence where you can love God without thinking of God as being so human-like. But but people need to be in the place that they're at.
Absolutely. I mean, you look at the Bible, you look at the Quran, God still refers at certain verses in the Quran, for example, although God says, "Lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad," which means there's nothing like him, right? There's nothing is comparable to him, nothing in his same form. Yet God speaks of himself as having hands. I created the heavens and the earth with my two hands, it says. It's also narrated in some sayings of the Prophet Muhammad that God laughed. When he heard his servant saying a particular thing. And the same thing in the Bible, it talks about God creating with his hands. Right?
Yeah.
So these are metaphors to help us understand. It's just, but that's all they are.
Right. Fair enough. Yeah. Awesome. So I guess we're talking about the varieties of prayer experience. Another question I had was about religious experience and what that kind of looks like in your mind. Like what kind of distinguishes something as being a religious experience?
So this is a really good question, because I've met people who are religious who said to me, I had a good friend at school who said to me, I think God wants me to go to this particular university. I was like, okay, well, why? And he goes, well, I just feel like that's what God wants me to do. And he told me. And I said, okay, he told you? Wow. Like how, like, what did he say? And he was like, well, it was just like when I boil it down, although he was using the words of he told me and God revealed this to me, it was very religious language, it boiled down to I had a very strong feeling. Now, I personally think that could simply be a psychological phenomenon. To put it bluntly, it could be a psychological phenomenon.
Yeah.
So to know how God communicates with people, I mean, the Quran is very clear. It says there are only a few ways by which God communicates with a human being. And these are standard through all, and you can see these in all religious texts, Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, right? And others, which is that God reveals something through a true dream. Now that's the most basic form, right? That's where you have a religious experience through your dreams. So that's not to say every dream you have is from God, obviously not. Most dreams you have, 99% are going to be just your own thinking about it. But sometimes you have a dream in which information is conveyed to you, and its difference is both in its clarity, right, and also that it's a coherent message, and most importantly is fulfilled, right. So what it tells you is then fulfilled. Another form of that's a normal, it's a very ordinary form of communication from God. A higher spiritual form is when you're awake and God shows you a vision. Visually, you are transported. You're awake, and this happens. And then the highest form is really where God directly speaks to you, which is obviously something which, in reality, very, very few humans ever get to experience. But the distinction of the Ahmadiyya Muslim faith and what we claim is that, and this is for people to verify themselves, is that when you accept the messenger whom God has sent for your guidance, then God manifests himself in these ways to a much higher degree and much more abundantly, and that makes sense. I mean, if God sends somebody for your guidance and you reject him, God's not going to talk to you as much as if somebody, who accepted him. And if you go on our YouTube channel and you type in Signs of the Living Faith, you'll see 4 videos by an African-American brother by the name of Hamza Elias, and he narrates his own experiences in that regard. He was a convert. He was a Christian from a Baptist family and became an Ahmadi Muslim. And he's a person who's had, so many extraordinary experiences.
I will look at that up. Yeah, for sure. I think I've actually watched 1 or 2 of his videos. I've been watching for a while, so that sounds familiar. He's on your channel?
That's right. He is. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Then I have. Yeah, for sure. Okay. Well, that's really interesting. That you have such specific ways that God speaks to us. I wonder if there's room for. Well, I mean, I guess I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm guessing that there are there are the echoes of God in nature and in others and in wisdom and all of that kind of thing.
They are absolutely.
These are just the ways that if God's directly contacting you. Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. And it's weird because I think that I have noticed since, I don't know. Yeah, it wasn't directly an audible voice that the time that I was referring to when I had this this experience that I had, and maybe it was or wasn't God, but what set it apart and what sets apart the dreams that I've had that have felt significant and felt spiritual is that they do have a confirming effect. Like they connect with things that have they connect with kind of cloudy things that have been unformed in yourself, and then they form connections. I think of the Holy Trinity. You're probably familiar with the idea of the Holy Trinity in Christianity, and I don't know what I think about the reality of the Holy Trinity, except that for a time in my life, and I'm getting more explicit with my spiritual side than I normally do on here, because this is kind of the nature of the conversation. But in my life, I experienced a period of leading the music at my church, and I was faith-wise at a very strange place. Just so much dissonance in my mind with my faith, and it was my prayer was that the Holy Spirit, that member of the Trinity, the Holy Spirit, would basically be present, would be noticeable, would be something I could enter into or experience when I went up on stage, because the last thing I wanted to do was be false. Like I had amongst all of the confusion, my main desire was not to be false.
Yeah, understood.
In the way that I displayed myself to human beings. And I experienced that. I mean, who knows, but it felt to me like there was a change. In intentionally inviting the Spirit of God, there was a difference. I would step onto the stage that we had and would feel that it happened. So I began to sort of characterize one of the aspects of God as that which connects the seemingly unconnectable, that which unites the ununitable, or the things that seemed separate in my mind, that which brings them together.
And that's actually an attribute of God in Islam. It's as-salam, which means
salam?
the source. as-salam, which means the source of reconciliation or peace.
Right. And so that was one of the ways I was experiencing God during that time, or I felt that I was experiencing God. I'd go away. That was the weird thing, is I would kind of go away, and it would go away again. It was like a little taste or something. And so I guess, yeah, I'm not sure exactly what I'm trying to say, except for that I've had some of these experiences you're talking about, these religious experiences, or of God, and that there's a kind of one of the ways that I've started to accept their legitimacy in any way is that they crystallize a thought, or they have an associated. It's not a feeling exactly. There's feeling associated, but there's kind of enough of a meaning and a relevance to what's going on that I don't know how to say this, that it feels like, religious or not, you can understand it, and you can feel the impact of it, and it helps you. And then the reason that you may want to categorize it as religious is strictly for maybe the searching for the ability to get that again. You know what I mean? Like, so the meaning is there, and you don't, for me, it's been very, very refreshing for a little while anyway, not to say, oh, this definitely had to be God, and throw it into that kind of questioning, like, oh, did it have all of the right properties of a religious experience, like, and really putting it in my head. But it was like, well, it actually brought with it the solution to a problem, or it brought with it a clarity or something like that. And it's like, okay, I could take that clarity and go away. And I don't know how I feel about entering back into a more religious life. I'm drawn towards it, and I'm questioning, but I think the thing that does pull you towards religion in that is that, okay, if this was, could religion possibly help me more reliably get this experience of meaning? And does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think
rationality.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, a lot of people don't like religion because it's formulaic, and also because it has, they think it's formulaic. And also, I think the thing that drives people away from religion more than anything else is the sense that they will be held accountable. And I'd say that's probably the biggest driver of people towards atheism. They realize that, hold on a second, when you join a religion, you subscribe to the belief that you'll be held accountable for your deeds. Now, some atheists have put, some religious believers have put it, some people yearn for accountability and other people shun it, and that tells you a little bit about them.
Right.
Some people want the world to be held accountable because they're upset about the state of the world and the injustices that have been committed. And then you have those people who don't want to be held accountable, perhaps because they're committing certain things that they don't want to be held accountable for. And I think that's a very deep psychological driver of movement away from religion, but also moving towards religion. In terms of religious belief being a means of connecting you with God, I mean, one of the things I love about Islam personally is that it's the only religion in the world which you have to acknowledge as an article of faith, otherwise you can't be a Muslim, that every other religion has also come from God. So, I can't be a Muslim if I say that Jesus wasn't from God. I'm immediately outside of Islam.
I did not know that.
Yeah, so because the view in Islam is that this is the final teaching sent to mankind, and that all previous religions were regional. They were for a limited time for a limited people. So, Moses came for the slaves of the children of Israel. Jesus came for the children of Israel. Krishna or Rama, they came for the people living around the Indus River. They became the Hindu religion. And Socrates came for the Athenians, etc. So our belief is that, it says in the Quran, God says that there is no people to whom a warner, a prophet has not been sent. So every people have had their teaching. But it says that this is that final religion. Because it's that final religion, it has to acknowledge the truth of every other religion. Other religions didn't have to do that because they weren't involved with preaching to other people. Right?
Interesting.
So from the perspective of, is a religious teaching, the means by which can it be the means by which you can connect to God? I think it's very important. It comes back to kind of the ways of prayer, the means of prayer, and the way it looks when you pray. And I'll link it in this way, that the nice thing I think about Islam is that it acknowledges the religious traditions of other faiths. And even the formulaic prayer that you do, it actually incorporates within it the movements in every other religion. So Christians kneel, Buddhists prostrate, other people might stand. Islam has every one of these, and the reason for that is to tell people from other faiths that this religion of Islam is not different to your religion. It's an expansion of your religion.
Okay.
Right? So it's not like you have to reject Jesus to become a Muslim, right? On the contrary, you have to actually accept what we believe is his true message, which was that he was a humble human being who sought to guide people to God, right? Not God himself. So I think religion most certainly is the most potent force for leading you to God, because you have to ask the question, and this is, again, it comes back to the philosophy of the teachings of Islam. One of the points he makes in that Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, he says that if God is a thing that you have to disinter from the earth yourself, right, through your own effort, then he is not actually worth finding.
Right. Yeah.
That God should be believed in, who reveals himself, who manifests himself. And so you have to ask the question, if God has sent all these prophets in the past, all these people, then surely the best way to God is by following the path that he himself told you to follow. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So this is what baffles me about some people. They're like, oh, I'm spiritual, right? And I want to get to God. Oh, but I hate organized religion.
Right.
It's like, well, hold on a second. Everything you've learned about your spirituality, whether it be prayer or fasting or meditation or self-reflection or doing good deeds or charity, where did you learn all these things from?
Right.
You know, you may think you just got them from the cultural ether, but the cultural ether got it from the religious traditions in your society.
Right. Yeah. I think that's one of the things that's very frustrating to atheists and people who, like you say, are spiritual but not religious, is that it's so complicated and difficult to disentangle yourself from the culture and the language that has been created in your head around spirituality and prayer and all of that is almost always linked back to a religious teaching. So yeah, it's interesting. So you're kind of saying there's a universality to Islam. It's kind of can be an overarching kind of.
Yeah, and that's actually what the founder of the Ahmadi Muslim community emphasized. He said that my mission I've come to introduce the whole world to Islam now. And he said that my mission is to spread the message of Islam without gun, without sword, without any hint of violence. So the motto of our community is love for all, hatred for none.
Right.
And the aim of our community is to show people that actually, exactly what I said earlier, Islam is not the rejection of their faith. It's actually the expansion of their faith, so that they don't just believe in Jesus, they also believe in Buddha. They also believe in Krishna. They also believe in Muhammad. Right? Peace be on them all.
Yeah. Well, that's fascinating. And it does feel to me like there's something happening. I'm always scared to say that things are unique in this time period, because I'm not enough of a historian to know that. But there definitely must be things that are unique in this time period. And one of them that kind of strikes me is that there does seem to be a great unraveling of a lot of different threads of belief. You know, like there's kind of a there does seem to be a big change happening, a kind of a secularization, but then at the same time a yearning for spiritual practice, and you have things like yoga that kind of mimic spiritual practice in a way, and that kind of thing.
I'm going to be bold here, and I've been thinking about this for a while. I personally think religion is making a massive comeback.
Okay.
And that in the course of my life, we'll see a massive shift back towards religion. I don't know whether you know, but maybe you've seen it. I'm not sure you have. It's very recent. We put a video out on an interview with a guy called Nick Spencer.
I think it's one of the ones I haven't watched yet. But
yeah, it's really worth watching. So he wrote a book called Atheists, The Origin of the Species. So he basically charts the development of atheism in Europe. And one of the key messages that come across from his analysis of history is that atheism always burgeons and flowers whenever religious believers behave in an oppressive fashion. And then atheism effectively becomes a weapon against oppression.
right,
and a manifestation against it. So he casts the development of atheism in Europe to have happened immediately after the religious wars of Europe, the wars of religion in Europe, which killed like a third of the population of Germany.
Yeah.
And he again associates the period of the new atheism to what happened after 9/11. And he sees 9/11 as the flashpoint for new atheism and the growth of new atheism.
Right.
But if you look at what's happening in the kind of cultural milieu now, there's a massive shift away from Richard Dawkins. He's regarded as a kind of fossil now, and there's a massive shift away from new atheism. And you even have people like Sam Harris now who are advocating meditation, for example, and believing in like panpsychism, which is something we discussed in the interview with Rupert Sheldrake.
Right.
Which is that there's a slide that back towards kind of religious belief.
So they've been running against the bungee cord, and now it's kind of starting to pull them back. Where I was getting at though actually was about this time period, and I said this in another interview. It's just it's kind of a picture that's been forming in my mind of I always thought when people were ready to kind of change and transcend, that it would be like Star Trek, like they'd meet a race that had transcended, and they would all be like wearing beautiful outfits. They'd all be gorgeous, and they had reached this higher level of, I'm not thinking of a specific episode, but they'd reached this higher level. But it actually feels more like, to me, like we're a big tribe of people, like the earth in general, especially with the internet uniting us all. We're like this giant disorganized tribe who's kind of in general been, I don't know, has been getting our nourishment from a certain way of life, or a certain way of religion, specifically a certain kind of dogmatic, very, and we need a change. And we do have a desire for that change. And I think the change is I think maybe we need some kind of change, like a tribe that goes from maybe what do you call it, agrarian to a nomadic tribe or something. And the kinds of conversations that would happen in reality in those. It wouldn't be a matter of everyone, meeting together and with one voice saying, we need to do this. It would be like, there would be the farmer who would say, no, this has worked for years and we need to keep it. And then there would be the revolutionary who would say, no, we need to immediately pack up our things and start moving with the herds of caribou or whatever. And that's kind of how it feels like. It feels like because the actual stakes, I think we know, like, I think in general, we know that there are pretty big stakes to, I don't know, how we respond, how we move forward. And I think there's a lot of splitting off and kind of tribalism and that kind of thing going on right now. But at the end of the day, I think all of it is motivated. It's not nihilism. It's something we need to change. And I think we're going that direction. And so you could be very right that we're going to experience a huge upsurge of religion of some kind. Like, sorry, go ahead.
No, go on. Finish what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, it could be right that religion is something that will spring forth, because it certainly does seem clear that people are seeking out ritual and spiritual experience, even those who don't describe themselves as spiritual at all. I just spoke with a Satanist actually for my podcast, and he's involved in an organization that has practices. They have rituals and ceremonies, and they don't believe, they're actually non-theistic atheists. So they don't believe in
yeah, I know, right, yeah.
They're non-theistic Satanists. Sorry, I don't mean atheists.
It's a brand more than a belief.
Yeah, I certainly find it fascinating, but anyway, I'm just saying that, like, if everyone is looking for these practices, then there is something in the air. So maybe it is going to be a return to religion. It's not a question. I was thinking.
Yeah, that's
based on what you were saying.
Problem.
Yeah,
that's okay. Yeah.
Awesome. So let me just look at my questions here for a second. Oh, I'm a real interviewer now. I have questions. Okay. So how about what about the mythological nature of the Quran? One of the things we have in, one of the big splits in Christianity over just how mythological or factually true, historically true, poetic language, just what is the Bible and what is it in its various different sections and the various different, like, there's this theory of the disappearing God, where at the very beginning of the Bible, God is walking in the garden with Adam and Eve, and by the end, God is physically absent and more, internalized psychologically. Where does the Quran sit with that for you? Yeah.
So, beginning with the nature of God, should we begin with that? Because I think
Sure.
that's the most important thing.
Certainly.
God is defined in the Quran, probably I'd say best in 2 chapters, one right at the beginning and one right at the end. So the opening chapter of the Quran gives the words. It's basically the prayer, the most important prayer in Islam. It's called the Surah Fatiha. Fatiha means the opening. So it's the opening of the book. It's only 7 verses, and we regard it as, God's gift to mankind, the perfect prayer which will connect man to God, undoubtedly, if it's used. And the words of the prayer introduce God in the beginning.
Okay.
So it says, in the name of Allah, the Gracious, the Merciful. I'll give you the translation because there's no point giving the Arabic. Every kind of praiseworthy, every kind of praise belongs and returns only to Allah. Right? I'm giving you the long form translation. The simple translation is all praise belongs to Allah. But actually, the true translation of the Arabic means every time of praise, both active and passive. So God both gives praise perfectly and also receives perfect praise. Belongs only to God. Belongs only to Allah. What that basically means is that everything that you see in life which you think is beautiful, whether it be the sunset or beautiful scenery, or the love you have for your wife, or the love a woman has for her husband, or the love you have for your children, or every kind of beautiful thing you have in your life is actually only a reflection of God's attribute. It has its origin in God. That's what it means, and in no one else.
Right.
And then it says, so that's the primary definition of God. And then it gives 4 attributes of God. It says he is the developer, the sustainer, and nourisher of every realm of existence. And then it says he is the one who is Rahman, which means the one who gives you gifts which you didn't even know you had a need for, let alone deserve. So like the sun, the moon, the ecosystem, the water cycle, the carbon dioxide cycle. Then he is the one who gives you reward in accordance with your efforts. So that attribute is only applicable to humans. Everything else is applicable to inanimate and animate life. And then the last one is and the Malik Yawmiddin, which is is translated loosely as the master of the day of judgment. But what it means is that he has perfect power over every recompense, every end result of your actions. So the important thing to note here is that in terms of the abstraction of God, I mean, the Christian tradition, God is literally embodied within the being of Christ. In the Islamic tradition, God is described by his attributes. Okay, and the idea is that you get closer to God by imitating his attributes, and that is actually the closest form of nearness you can have to anything, because that is the closeness of being. So we're talking right now, and you and I are conversing, and in a sense we have become near to each other by communication. If I was to sit next to you, I would be near to you in physical body. 2 people who love each other are near each other as well. But the closest type of being is to become like something else as far as is possible. So that's that is how God is known. He's known through his attributes in Islam, not through any kind of, physicality.
Okay.
In terms of the mythological nature of the Quran, like when do you take something to be a metaphor and when do you take it to be literal, which is, I think, kind of what you were particularly
I mean, I'd like it to be open enough that if it spurs you to a different interpretation, even of the question, you go with it. But,
I thought that was kind of what you were in particular. Because I mean, it's basically that, is it a literal book or a metaphorical book or both?
And I realize it's maybe not a simple thing to answer. It's not a yes or no, but interested in your thoughts.
So the Quran answers this. It gives a really simple answer. It's in chapter 3, verses 7 to 9. chapter 3 verse 7 according to one numbering system, chapter 3 verse 8 according to another one. And it says that there are two types of verses in this book. There are verses that are clear and decisive in meaning. There's no ambiguity about them. They're obvious. Okay, so like a verse like that would be that it says in the Quran, there is no compulsion in religion. Okay, so there's no compulsion in religion. It's a categorical statement. Okay, there are no caveats given, etc., etc. Right. Then it says the second type of verses in the book are contextual. Right, they're known as mutashabihat in Arabic, which means they're susceptible of different interpretations. You could read them this way, you could read them that way. And it says in the Quran, in the same verse, it says, those who have perversity in their hearts, those who are perverse in their nature and their understanding, and they want to impose their particular meaning on a particular verse of the Quran, they take that which is susceptible of different interpretations, and they interpret it in a way which makes it contradict those verses that are clear and obvious in meaning.
Okay.
Right?
All right.
So what they do is they impose a meaning on the metaphorical verses or the interpretative verses,
right,
and they make them dominant over verses that could not have any other interpretation, and they cause contradiction.
Right.
And then it says, God and those who are grounded in knowledge, who have real knowledge of the book, they say the whole of the Quran is from our Lord. The whole of the Quran is from God, and we have to interpret everything in consonance with each other. So I'll give you an example to make it more embodied. So the verse which is clear and obvious in meaning is there is no compulsion in religion. But the Quran also talks about how the Prophet Muhammad had to go to war to defend himself and his faith, and the fact that his followers were being butchered by idolaters. And there are certain verses of the Quran that talk about the state of warfare between Muslims and non-Muslims, because the Muslims had become so kind of meek and mild after 13 years of persecution, being told don't fight. They actually were reticent and they didn't want to fight. Many of them. And it says in the Quran that your hearts shirk from fighting. Whereas actually your lives and your faith and your entire belief in God, it depends on it now. You have to take up arms for self-defense. And so there are some verses, for example, that say that encourage Muslims that go forth and fight them, right? And it's what people like ISIS and terrorists do is they take that verse which says, you should go and fight these disbelievers. And they say, well, you see, we have to fight all the non-Muslims. Right? But they don't look at the fact that it's a verse which is contextual, and the very next verse says, but if they don't fight you, then you have no permission to fight them. If they ask for peace, you must make peace with them. Right? So what they're doing is they're taking their particular interpretation, forcing it upon that verse, which has to be seen in the context of its time, and then making it contradict a principle that's given, which is there is no compulsion in religion.
Right.
So the Quran is both a literal and a metaphorical book, but like every good document, any good contract you come across, it has a section called interpretation. How do you interpret this contract? Right? Even in a contract of getting a tenancy agreement, it means it says the landlord refers to this person, the tenant refers to this person. Right? So the Quran does that. It tells you right at the beginning, chapter 3, it tells you this book has these kinds of things. These are the terms. If you're perverse, you'll make contradiction in this book. If you're not perverse, you'll understand everything in consonance with each other.
Right. And so there's a kind of, I've thought about this, about the Bible and about people saying it's the inerrant word of God. And it's kind of maybe a heretical statement in my own faith to say that if there is no subjectivity at all, if there's nothing open to interpretation, then there can't be any more word from God. It's a dead book, So, I mean, I think the best of Christian theology does do that as well, where it says, and I'm not defending Christian theology specifically, but where it just, people want to take a certain verse in a certain way, but it says, no, here's another verse. And so we have to kind of view the whole thing together. So I guess there's kind of I like the idea of subjectivity is not exactly even the word, just narrative has this narrative has this quality of having embedded truth that can be revealed through time and with understanding and with deeper reflection. And it's not exactly subjective. I think it's just that interested in your thoughts on this, but that anything that's presented as a narrative kind of has can have more in it when you approach it with the right spirit.
I 100% agree. And people often ask, for example, atheists I've been in conversation with will say, well, what was the need for God to give this story, or what's the value in this story? Wouldn't it have been better if God had, given us all of the equations to how to discover the Higgs field or the Planck's constant?
Yeah.
And it's like, no, it wouldn't, because that wouldn't actually result in the end goal, which is the perfection of your morals and your spiritual character. Knowing the equation of the Planck constant is irrelevant.
Right.
To actually developing yourself as a human being. And so, the reason why God gives these stories, I think, is twofold. One, because a story can convey an enormous amount of information, right?
Yeah.
And it can tell a message to a person who's a complete and utter simpleton, right? And it can also tell a message to the greatest philosopher who's ever lived,
right?
And they all get different levels out of it, but everybody gets something.
Yeah.
If you have equations to the Higgs field, the only people who would get anything would be physicists in the 21st century or the 20th century. The 12th century caravan trader, right? The 9th century merchant is not going to get anything from that book. And this is something that came up we released a clip today, which was a discussion with two ex-Muslims, then atheists, Ali Rizvi and Armin Nabavi, there's a verse of the Quran that describes the Big Bang in our view, right? It says, it describes the creation of the universe, and God says, do not the disbelievers see, right? So this is addressing non-Muslims, implying that they're the ones who are going to be discovering this. It says, do not the disbelievers see that the heavens and the earth were a closed up mass, and then we clove it asunder, and we clove them asunder. And from water did we create every living thing.
Right.
So to us, that means the universe was a homogeneous mass, which was cloven asunder, and then everything came out of that, and God created everything, living thing from water. And we say, well, look, a 7th century Arab merchant could not have known this.
Right.
And their argument was, well, couldn't he have described the universe better than by calling it heaven and earth?
Yeah.
Well, and it's like, well,
not if you're Revelation. Sorry, keep going.
Well, not if you're a 12th century Persian,
right? Yeah,
goat herder.
It would have been ignored. It would have been completely ignored and put aside. Okay, we don't know what that's talking about. So, what's the purpose? Yeah,
exactly. So it would have no meaning for them. Right. The only question I asked to them, and what I said to them was, "Do you understand heaven and earth to refer to the universe?" And they said, "Yes." I said, "Well, then the job is done. Then the job is done. It conveyed the necessary information, which is the universe was a single mass and it clove asunder."
Rupert Sheldrake said something in your interview with him that I'd never twigged in my mind before. I've watched it more than once. And he said that at the beginning of his scientific career, let's see, how would I put it? I wish I'd written it down. Like basically he was basically saying at the beginning of his scientific career, he had the principles and the philosophy first, and then went on with the practice of it. And in his religious life, he had the practices first, and then he went on to the belief later. And I think that kind of, it jumped out at me. It seems like it was just a personal part of his personal story, almost like he was saying that was just his experience. But it made me think, there is kind of a sense with science where you do begin, and necessarily you begin with the principles and the philosophy of science. You get those thoroughly explained, and then you get, then you move towards further understanding. So you almost start off at the very beginning with an acceptance of faith in science, like in the scientific method. This is such a new idea that I might, forgive me, it might end up being gibberish. But with religious faith, and this has been true of me, you move towards something you don't understand. You kind of move in the ways that you can. You try and find a better path, and it's all kind of, it can be rather up in the air until you have that experience of God, until you actually feel that you've had a subjective experience of God, or maybe you have it first, but you haven't internalized all of the philosophy. I guess it seemed like at the time, I can't say it now, but it seemed like at the time it was sort of accidentally articulating how science and religion are just different.
So I would somewhat agree with that.
I don't even know if I agree with it, but continue.
I would say that both science and religion begin in the same way. The first way the science begins is with observation, right? And often it's accidental observation, right? Often it's, I didn't notice that before.
Right.
It was, penicillin growing in a petri dish. It is, the person who invented, for example, the sewing needle and decided to put the thread in the tip rather than in the bottom. The way he got that idea, he was thinking, how do I make a sewing? Because he was creating a sewing machine. It was a massive revolution in industrial technology, and he was thinking on it, and he had a dream in which he saw that he had been captured by some cannibals on an island. And have you heard of this?
No, it's fascinating.
Yeah, so he was captured by some cannibals on an island, and they were about to roast him on the spit. And they were jumping up and down around him with their spears, and he noted that in the tips of their spears, the hole was at the tip. And then he realized while he was in the dream, that's the solution to my problem.
That's so funny.
Or it's like Kekulé, the chemist, the founder of organic chemistry. How did he come up the benzene ring? He had a dream in which he saw a snake bite its own tail. And so he realized that actually the structure of benzene is actually that it's a ring structure.
Amazing.
And that's how organic chemistry was born.
Right.
So science doesn't always follow principles first. I'd say it begins with observation, and then you get the principles through justification. You justify the observation.
Right.
So Isaac Newton saw the apple fall, or he didn't actually, but he imagined the apple falling, and then he was like, what the hell caused that? How did that happen? So there's a bit of both. Some science progresses because you have a principle, like I'd say, for example, a lot of theoretical physics. It begins with an idea or mathematical equation that seems to make sense. It fits the maths, and then they go and search for the experimental evidence for it, confirm it, right? So the Higgs boson is a good example of that. Religious belief, I think, begins often with an observation, and it is the observation of the world around us. And it begins with how the hell did all of this come about through a random process? Because if I, leave my kitchen to my 3-year-old, they don't produce Jamie Oliver's latest recipe. Okay. It takes a lot of time, expertise, and craftsmanship to get anything in my experience. So how on earth did we get photosynthesis? How on earth did we get chlorophyll? How on earth did we get mitochondria, etc.? Often begins with observation.
Right.
Another massive, I think, probably the biggest driver of belief or disbelief in God, the key difference between atheists and believers, other than the thing about accountability, is that a person who believes in God will hear somebody say, and the person who makes the claim could be named Muhammad, it could be Moses, could be Jesus. The person says, God has communicated with me, right? God has told me this, 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 this. You should live your lives like this, and then God will communicate with you. A believer hears that and says, I don't think he's insane, and I don't think he's lying, so I believe him. In other words, he trusts him.
Right.
A person who rejects an atheist will say, I think you're a liar, or I think you're crazy. And that is the key difference, is one of trust. Are you the person who would rather trust somebody or rather regard them or think ill of them? And this is why the founder of our community, he said that everything in religion is underpinned by thinking well of people. That is the fundamental core philosophy of religious belief, which is assumption that people are decent.
Right. Well, it does speak to my reasoning for having this podcast, because I had a suspicion that has so far proven true, that if someone gave me the impression that they were a true seeker of some kind, that I could find the good in, not that it's me, I don't make the good in what they're saying, but through really trying to listen and connect with people, that I could find the good and the decency in people, that you can kind of recognize it, even when it takes many different cultural cultural guises. And so I guess I'll ask my last question, which is, let's see if I can phrase it as a question. But my suspicion has been that there's an intuitive, that religion has a strongly intuitive element to it. Like you can kind of, maybe that's, I mean, intuition is intrinsically a part of science as well, especially in, forming hypotheses and deciding what to search for. But it feels to me like belief in an actual God will always be, you were saying, the result of an observation. And I feel like it's the result of an intuition based on an observation, and that there'll always be a kind of a mysterious, well, definitely a mysterious quality to it. And it does seem to me as though there is an unspoken war against intuition happening in the world in some corners. And so I wonder if you share that idea, or if that means anything to you.
Yeah, so I mean, from the religious perspective, theological perspective, there is the Quran states that God has implanted in every human being, in every soul, a recognition that He exists. So there's a verse in the Quran that says, "And remember the day when Allah addressed the souls and asked, 'Am I not your Lord?' And they said, 'Yes, indeed.' And He said, we did this so that you should not say that. Sorry, I did this so that you should not say we were unaware." Right. So in other words, it's saying that implanted within every soul, God has they intrinsically know that they do have a creator. And I think this manifests itself with the actual progress and the pace of material progress in this age of ours is extraordinary, such that a person who lives an average life in most of the world lives better than the kings of past ages. I think we can comfortably say that, right? And yet the dissatisfaction that we have is still there. And then the empty void. I mean, Pascal said it. He said, every human being has a God-shaped hole in his heart.
Right.
And it doesn't matter what they try to fill it with, it's still God-shaped.
Yeah.
And you see this. I was reminded of this. I've been watching the Netflix series The Crown recently. And there's a bit in that where Prince Philip, he's Prince Philip, he's the husband of the current Queen of England. And he reaches middle age and he's dissatisfied with it, and basically sort of a midlife crisis. And it's so well written. And it really moved me, actually, that there are so many people who are kind of seeking that. They're seeking God, and they don't even know it. And again, I come back to this book. Every answer I think there is possible, really, in principle, is in a way given in the Philosophy of the Teachings of Islam, that book I read. And he has the whole chapter on this very topic. It's called The Search for God. And he says that, let's see if I can remember it. I had memorized it once, but just by reading it so often. He says that whether it be the sound of a musical voice, or the love of your wife, or the love of your children, that these things are all indications of the search for the true beloved. He says that just as man cannot detect just because as man cannot detect that imperceptible God easily through his material phenomena, I'm paraphrasing now, through material phenomena, he has been misled grievously in his search for God, such that every single thing he comes across in his life, he looks for God in that thing. Right? And I think that actually is a perfect, and he says it is as if you have lost something, the name of which you have forgotten, and which you seek to find in everything you come across. That's what he says. Right. Which is such a poetical way of saying it. It's like you remember something, but you can't remember the name of it. And you're like, is this the thing? Is this the thing? Is this the thing? You go to your wife, you go to your children, you go to your career, you go to your health. People become obsessed with fitness. They're all seeking God.
Right.
What they're doing is they're all seeking permanence. And that is the deepest intuition in human beings, that ultimately they are faced with death and the void of death.
Yeah.
And they're terrified of it, and they're seeking permanence. Right. And that can be your psychopathic, president, Okay. Okay. Or it could be your fitness obsessed gym worker. Right.
Yeah.
So they're all seeking God in their own way. And that, I think, is the most important intuition. And there is a war against that insofar as we're told that it doesn't exist.
Right.
We're told that you should be satisfied with materialism and the enjoyment of material abundance, but people aren't.
Yeah. And the dangerous part of it, to me, is this took me a long time to kind of realize, and I'm not as interested in atheists as I used to be, or the idea of debating, and it's because it's not the idea that you don't believe in God that is scary, or that is sort of detrimental to you. It's the idea that you must never, or that it's telling yourself what you can't believe before you understand it. And so, in other words, a person who is an atheist who is seeking the love you talk about between themselves and their family, between, who is looking for the beauty in a musical voice, that person is still experiencing God. They have not necessarily, by their lack of belief, they have not necessarily tyrannized their mind. They haven't oppressed their own thinking. And I've realized that about some of my own beliefs, that I, despite my best efforts, kind of didn't believe them. But for some of them, I have a desire to believe them, and for some of them, I feel that I may never. But I guess what I'm just trying to say is that I don't like to look at an atheist as my enemy. I know you're not saying that they are by any means, because I don't know where I don't know where I stand on this. But someone who is willing to say what they will never believe and what they must not believe at all costs when it comes to the existence of God. That it's the very fact that they're willing to do that, or that they're compelled to do that, and then compelled to get someone else to do that, that makes me uncomfortable. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I would say, my closest non-Muslim friend, who's actually probably one of my absolute closest friends, is an atheist, and his wife is I'd say a hardened atheist. And I'm good friends with them because they're good people. They're lovely people, and I love spending time with them. And so I've developed a great affection for both of them. So I do, however, feel that I understand what you mean. It's not tyrannizing your mind to reject, but I actually think it is, because what you've done is you've cut asunder. So the first thing I'd say is that I don't think many atheists would ever say that they will never believe in God.
Right.
I think most atheists would say, "You present me the decent enough evidence, I will believe in God."
Fair enough.
But I don't think they have necessarily the full self-awareness. So, for example, Richard Dawkins was asked this question. He was asked, well, because he classifies himself as an agnostic atheist. And he was asked, well, what would it take to make you to believe in God? And he said, well, I used to think to myself that if, God was to spell out in the clouds, "Hi, Richard, it's me, God," or something like that, then I would believe. But he said, then I was convinced by a friend of mine that actually, if you were to see that, you would more likely think it was a hallucination, and that you were actually having a hallucinatory experience. And so he said, by that virtue, I've come to the realization that almost nothing would make me believe in God. And that's an unfalsifiable belief, an unscientific belief.
Right.
And it's funny because the Quran talks about that. It says that God says that even if I was to cause the disbelievers to ascend into heaven, and they were to witness heaven themselves and hell themselves and all the phenomena, they would only say our eyes are bewitched.
Right. Yeah. There's similar things in the Bible. Yeah. Yeah, it's true. Like, and so I didn't mean to be making statements about categorical statements about atheists, but I guess my encouragement for anybody would just be to listen to that voice of intuition, and not to stress about feeling that they have to believe in God or that they have to not believe in God. That when you're talking about an ultimate reality and theoretically the source of love and compassion, that you follow the spring, you follow this. When you find a trickle, you follow it to where it began. And they may never believe in God, but they may do wonderful things in that search. So anyway, that I appreciate your perspective on that. I think we actually are in agreement there. But,
yes, absolutely.
So we're at an hour and a half, which went by like that. I've really appreciated this conversation, Tahir.
No, thank you, Aaron. I've really enjoyed myself, actually.
Yeah, I'm so glad. And what you were saying earlier, you were it does feel to me that there's a wonderful thing that happens when you. I guess this is about how I try to approach people as though anyone I speak to, disagreement is going to be only present to find wisdom or to refine. And that's how I felt this conversation has been for me. So very refreshing. And I appreciate that. I encourage everybody listening to this to check out Rational Religion. I was drawn in through David Berlinski's interview and through Rupert Sheldrake. Berlinski is such a nut. I love him. Yeah. Oh man, I love the cane and everything. That whole interview is, even the way you guys are sitting is so.
I know.
Like, we were like, that one.
We were like, Mr. Berlinski, do you think we could do it like position it here and you could sit here? And he was like,
no,
nah, I want to sit on the couch. and you two should sit there. We were like, there's not much space. And then my brother was like, dude, it says house. You got to do what he says.
That's amazing. Yeah, no, I thought that added an amazing kind of awkwardness to it, but in a cool way. So that was what started me. I'm not officially promoting David Berlinski. Other than that, he is a compelling figure. Like, if you listen to him with an open mind, you're going to learn something or think something new. But anyway,
you'll at least learn some new words.
Exactly. Yeah. What an interesting fellow. I'd love to interview him. And Rupert Sheldrake, he's one of my top desires to interview, because he's so interesting. So there's that, and then there's all kinds of things you guys have about all kinds of different religious things. Very interesting. So I encourage my listeners, who are far fewer than yours, to check out Rational Religion.
You keep going the way you're going. I think you'll have loads in good time, because I absolutely do, and I hope so, because you have such a open mind and a kind of welcoming perspective, and I've really enjoyed this interview. Actually, it's been amazing. Actually, I've really enjoyed myself, and you actually genuinely listen, which is a rare thing, I think. So I really enjoyed myself, and we started 4 years ago, and we're not huge. We're moderately sized. Some would say small. We've managed to punch above our weight with our guests.
Yeah.
I think.
Me too.
And, yeah, absolutely.
With you?
No, not with me. No. Because at the end of the day, I personally think that people will be drawn to the honesty in what you have to say, and sometimes these things just take time. But I have no doubt you'll be, next Joe Rogan. Who knows?
Oh my goodness! Well, okay. Well, thank you so much. And with that, oh my goodness.
I hope so.
Well, I wish the best for yours, and I will continue to add to your watch count on a personal level. So, and it's so great to meet you. And maybe in a year we could chat again about fatherhood.
I was about to say, if ever you want me back on the show, I'm very happy to do so.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd love to. I'd actually love to get your perspective on fatherhood, and I might intentionally wait a little while, so you can get through a few more phases of it and get some more sleep. No, yeah. Okay, and with that, I will say farewell.
Thank you.
Have a great evening.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thanks, Tahir.
Peace be on you.